If you've decided to invest in a below-the-hook lifting device, how do you figure out which one's the right one for you? With so many different sizes and configurations, we figured we'd just start by putting two of them against each other, lifting versus spreader beams. Hey guys, Devin here from Mazzella Companies, and today we're talking about below-the-hook lifting devices. To help me tell this story, I reached out to Dan Sherwood, a below-the-hook lifting device project manager here with Progressive Crane. We figured we'd just start by putting two of them against each other, lifting versus spreader beams, and we'll start from there.
So the main difference between a spreader and a lifting beam is a spreading beam has top rigging on top, so it could be a wire rope sling, a web sling, a chain sling coming up off top, usually connecting into two lifting points, whereas a lifting beam has some type of a fixed or movable plate or pin structure. There's no rigging to it. It's usually one point of connection. You could have it where it's two rigid fixed points of connection going up to two crane hooks. The lifting beam is typically going to get you lower with your headroom requirement for making a lift, whereas a spreader beam is going to require more headroom to make your pick, mainly because you're coming up to a sling at the top. Spreader beam is going to give you more load stability than, let's say, a single point lifting beam. You're spreading kind of your load out, so you won't be as wobbly. I mean, think of like a seesaw, where you kind of have your one pivot point there, and you can get some of that depending on where your center of gravity is on your load. It's a little more forgiving with kind of with a spreader beam.
Aside from all those differences, Dan told me about bending stress, and I'll let him explain that to you.
So if you think of bending as basically trying, if you take a stick and you put it over your knee and you try to break a stick over your knee, that's essentially what you're trying to do with a single point lifting beam, where your knee would be where your crane point would connect to, and where your hands are is where your load's pulling down onto, and it's starting to kind of frowny face. That's what's known as bending. The beam's going to want to bend. So when you get kind of the single point beam, you really have to look into a true full bending moment. Where when you're talking about your top rigging beams, if you're picking out at the end of your beam and your top rigging points are, let's say, 3 feet off of those lifting beams, your actual bending is only that 3 feet, as opposed to if that's a 30-foot beam, that whole 30 feet. So you can really reduce the size of the steel you need to use, lighten your load up.
Dan told me that typically fractures in either beam happen when somebody misapplies force or just doesn't take a careful pick.
You can make a spreader beam 30 feet long with pick points, at the 30 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet, and at center, and you can use that to pick a wide variety of everything. Just when you're on the engineering side of it, you want to make sure you're designing that for, a worst case scenario. If they were picking that entire weight on one point on that spreader beam, if they were going to pick on the center of that spreader beam at one point and be pulling, up, that would kind of be your worst case scenario you'd want to design for. So in the engineering, we try to make sure we cover all of our bases of misuse that could happen out, in the field like that, where they rig it a way it's not necessarily intended to be rigged. We don't want the device to fail. We try as hard as we can to design that safety into the beams while keeping costs down.
Now, there are a few times where a lifting beam maybe outperforms a spreader beam, and typically that comes down to clearing spaces and working environment.
Probably the most common application we see spreader beams used in is the construction industry. They're normally outside. They don't really have a restriction for headroom, being with mobile crane, usually working with enough excess headroom to make a spreader beam work. You definitely get more load stability and control with a spreader beam than you do a lifting beam. If they're using kind of like a telescoping spreader beam, where it'll grow and shrink depending on the load size they're picking, it'll give them a lot more versatility, than a fixed bale beam and fixed pick points would do. Now, where you're gonna get a lifting beam advantage is, you're gonna get that lower headroom. You can do a lot more with lifting beams than you can spreader beams in that aspect. If you're having any concern deciding what's the right lifting device, the right beam for you, I mean, you can contact your local area rep if you don't have a local area rep. I mean, you can look it up online. You can find a reputable manufacturer who can definitely help you make that decision in what's going to be best for your application.
I hope this video was able to help you better understand lifting and spreader beams. If you like this video, consider checking out the rest of our Rigging Professor series, and while you're there, subscribe and share the videos. There's a ton of content that we're gonna make this year, and I don't want you to miss out. If you have any questions or just need help getting started with your next lifting project, don't hesitate to reach out to one of our specialists. They'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you for watching.